Alright guys, now the harness looks pretty much the same, right? And it is for the most part, but I forgot to mention a thing that was important because I didn't have this in the car anymore, so I forgot about it. But we need to power the coils as well as the injectors. They both take a positive 12 volts. Now you could technically run them directly from the battery positive. I want to make them switched, so I'm going to be running some relays. But those relays are going to get triggered, and then from there it has to also go back into the harness to come out with the actual coils and injectors themselves. So what I'm doing is I'm making some smaller harnesses that look like this. This is one of the small connectors, 2-pin that I have, and I was surprised this is an actual Deutsch connector. I thought they were just knockoffs, but you can see it says Deutsch on there. So that's really nice. But what I went ahead and did is took some wires, and these are white with purple stripe. And anything that's white and striped is actually an injector wire. So these are injector 8 from the kit, because remember we only have a 6-cylinder, but this comes with all 8 wires for a V8. And then over there on the ground is the cylinder 7. So what I did, I took the injector wire from my new kit and the injector wire from my old kit. So I had 2 injector 8s. I cut them each in half because I really don't need that much harness from these. And then I went ahead and pinned them in here. Thankfully it allows me to pin 2. Slip it over this little orange plastic boy can actually come out, the rubber seal. So take the seal out, push them through there, and then put them in. Otherwise it can get caught up on the seal itself and push the seal into the body. What I'm going to go ahead and do is put this in here. So this is the main loom, and then it splits off right here into the 3. So we have side, and then map and intake air temp stuff. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is put this about right here, and they're going to go ahead and I'm going to be able to plug and unplug the power directly from my relay. So I have a couple of these that are going out, and that's going to go ahead and trigger my relay, and then I'm going to have a second harness that comes back over and plugs into the main harness again. So I'm going to have 2 of these. One of them is going to go to injectors, one of them is going to go to the coils. The injectors really shouldn't be using too much energy in terms of like amperage. You should be able to get away with, you know, maybe 10 amps. But the coils can theoretically use 40 to 50 amps. So I'm going to go ahead and make both of them the same. I'm going to do this where it's 4 wires total. These are both going to be feeding things. So these 2 are going to be feeding 1, 3, and 5, and these 2 are going to be feeding 2, 4, and 6. So 3 coils for 2 wires. Hopefully that will be enough gauge between them. One of the things that Rob Dahm talks about in his video is you always overestimate how much wire you're going to need. You know, a lot of these, they're 18 gauge or maybe even 20 gauge. You could have gotten away with 20 or 22 gauge on a lot of these, especially signal wires for stuff like sensors and things. You really don't need them to be too big. But this is one of those things I just want to be 100% certain on. You can actually go online and calculate how big of a wire you need for certain amps, but that is a constant draw, and technically, unless we're going really fast, these are not constant draws. These are, you know, momentary for, you know, it's a spark or a coil click, and then it's off. So technically we can undersize these wires a little bit. I feel very confident that 2 wires for 3 coils is going to be just enough. So I'm going to be doing this for both of them, and then I'm also going to be running them to a fuse and to a relay. So hopefully that should be all good. The relays are also 40 amps, so I might have to bump up the coil relay to a 50 amp. We will see about that. But other than that, I think this should be good. I'm going to build a second harness of these for the, I haven't decided which one this is going to be. But because they're the same, they're going to be, you know, able to be plugged in either way, so it doesn't matter actually what they are, as long as they both get positive 12. So, going to make a second harness of this, and then I'm going to go ahead and heat shrink all of it, which is an absolute nightmare, because you have to heat shrink things overlapping, which is difficult when you have something coming out with the harness and then opposing the harness. So I'm going to have a piece in the middle here, and then I have to have a piece that goes over it here and over it here, which means I have to heat shrink this middle piece, and then put a big piece over all of this, heat shrink the big piece, and then put another big piece and heat shrink this big piece. So you have to have a lot of mental fortitude in order to kind of figure out what you need, and especially bigger connectors, you're not going to be able to put the heat shrink over, so you have to take that into consideration. You know, the biggest heat shrink I have here, this really massive stuff, it barely fits over this. So if I wanted to heat shrink on this edge right here, I'd either have to put it on first, like go through the entire harness, weave everything through it, and then put it on, and then take the smaller piece, weave it through, heat shrink the smaller piece, and then heat shrink the big piece. Or if I had this, and luckily it fits over, I could go ahead, put the smaller piece on, and then take this and feed it from this side and heat it up and shrink it on. So it is all just a big game of what needs to go on when and how can you achieve it. If I hadn't had pinned this, it would have made things a lot easier because I could technically go on from both ends. Most of the heat shrink that I have will actually fit over this diameter. It just won't fit over this diameter. So that is just one thing to think about when you're building these harnesses. Hopefully I'm going to go ahead and do a bunch of this, and the next shot you guys should see will be a, I don't want to say finished harness, but a well completed, you know, onto the finishing stages of the harness. Alright, let's jump to that. Alright, I lied, we are not wrapping this in heat shrink quite yet, but as you can see, we've got a pretty good thing going on. So I went ahead and put a pretty heavy weight on this end. The reason you would really want to put like no connector on the end here is so you could do something like this where you have one end, have the other end held, and then you just cut the ends off. That way you don't use any crushed wire. But I'm pretty sure that this weight is on all of them fairly evenly, so it shouldn't be causing any stress. But you can see I've got the core of the harness going on right here. It is not a perfect wrap, but it's looking pretty good. So this bundle of wires that I have right here, let me show you this end. It's just on some little vise all, got like two clamps on there. Anyway, I'm also cutting off the TSB like right here or something. So I've got plenty of room for where I'm not crushing the wire I'm going to use. Regardless, back to this, you can see it's doing pretty good. This core bundle of wires is going to be cylinders 2, 4, and 6 with the crank angle sensor, and then the CHTS, the coolant temp sensor, is also woven into here as well. So what I'm going to do is, you can see sections where I haven't quite used all the wire. So it's probably going to take 2 or 3 more wires to fill this in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use filler wire to do that. So that way I can have, realistically, it's probably going to be 2 levels of wrapped wire. It'd be great if each, you know, of the 3 had their own level, but the next level is going to be a lot wider in diameter, so I'm going to be able to fit a lot more wires. So if I did want 3 levels of wrapped wire, I'd end up using a lot of filler wire, which, you know, it might not be bad. So we'll see. We will see how well that turns out on the next wrap. But I'm going to go ahead and fill this in with some filler wire. The way I'm going to denote these, just so I don't get them mixed up, is I'm just going to put long strips of Sharpie all the way up and down them. That way if I pull out, you know, a chunk of wires and I'm like, okay, what are these? I can easily detect, you know, this is obviously not something I'm going to use. These are also labeled. You can see they've got labels on them, so that is going to be something super helpful as well. If you were doing it like Rob Dom, he's using Tefzel wire, T-F-Z-E-L, Tefzel. It's a really, really high wire grade, and if I had thought about it, I probably would have used it for this project. It's roughly 30 cents per foot, and you need, you know, 300 feet or so, which is roughly $100 in wire. But I didn't really look into it that much because I know it is expensive, and $100 for wire is not bad. This whole kit was $150 if that puts it in perspective. But I also, that would be one color. To order multiple colors, it goes up, because obviously the more you buy, the cheaper it is. Anyway, so it would have been a little bit more of a hassle, but he uses Tefzel wire. And it's really, really nice because it's super slippery. Like, the outside coating on it is very slick. So when you're wrapping it and like throwing it up and around here, it doesn't get bundled up and bunched too badly. So that would be a really, really good thing to do. Using filler wire, if you're using Tefzel though, it literally is just using money. At least with this, it all came with the kit. So I didn't have to order extra for the filler. But anyway, it's looking really, really good. I'm going to go ahead, fill in this layer, do the next layer, maybe a third layer depending on how much it is, and then we will go ahead and pick up from there. Alright guys, this harness is looking really, really good. If you can see, I've got the second layer going on. And so we had the first layer that was going one direction, and when you do the second, you go the opposite direction. So that's just going to give the maximum amount of flexibility in here. And this is also going to help us reduce our EMF waves for our crank angle sensor. Having everything twisted like this, it's a really good way of doing that. So I've got all three of the main bundles in this now. The first layer was just number 1, and then the second layer I currently have 2 and 3. But you can see there's still space here, so I'm going to put some filler wire in. I think what I'm going to do, these are my 12 volt power sources if you remember. They're 4 wires, and they fit in here pretty close. I think I need maybe 1 or 2 more wires, if you can see that, to fill in the gap. But it's looking pretty good, so I might try to weave these in. Now, let's go ahead and jump over here real quick. I made this whole list of basically everything and what it requires. So, I've got O2. I don't actually have that in here anymore. It's going somewhere else. Intake air temp is 5 volt and sensor ground. Map is 5 volt and sensor ground. Throttle position, 5 volt sensor ground. And technically a signal. These are just like what it needs that aren't specific. CHTS is 12 volts, and then a sensor ground as well. The crank angle sensor, 12 volt sensor ground. But this is actually changing to the ground that we put in earlier. Fuel pressure, sensor ground 5 volt. Oil pressure, same thing. Flex fuel, 12 volts, and then a sensor ground. Let's see, and then, so what I did over here, you can see I have my branches and then what's in them. So this is like the main stem, like right next to the connector. We're coming out with grounds, switch 12 volt, and then the fuel pump and sensor, and then power. Fuel pump, power, fuel pressure, and then oil pressure and oil temp, those sensors, as well as our fan trigger. And then over on this side, I made a list of everything I need. So 12 volt power is going to coils, injector, crank angle sensor, CHTS, and flex fuel. So when I'm going through this, I'm going to make sure that I have power run to all of those. 5 volts, we have our MAP, TPS, and IAT. The reason I have these two bracketed here is because these two come out of the stem, and then these two come out of the branches up top. Same thing with the sensor ground. The only ones I have here are the fuel pressure and oil pressure that need to come out of the stem. So now coming back over to this, I've woven in, if you can see this gray wire. It's a little bit yellow on screen, I realize, but actually that flipped right there. We need to fix that. You can see it's gray and then orange, but this is orange and then gray. So I need to fix that to make it flat. But the gray is 5 volt reference, and then I believe this one right here, this white with a black stripe, that is our sensor ground. So we have this bundle coming out here at the stem, and we need power to those from these guys. So what I'm probably going to do is probably split it about right here, and then use my solder seal that are over here under all this stuff, and then wrap a secondary wire coming back this way, and then I'll just have it go U and then back up into this guy here. So we need to do that for both of these, get power out to this, and then I believe we only have stuff coming out of the second and third main harness for the sensor ground and the 5 volt for the crank angle sensor, CHTS, and then all the map and intake air temp stuff. So we should be able to be fine with, this is the main bundle down here, and then this is number 2, I believe, and this is number 3. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to fill this in as much as possible with all these guys, basically where I want. And then I'm going to go take it, put it back on the car again, and then make sure all the wire lengths measure up. Because I kind of just made one big wiring harness here, but a lot of this stuff actually splits like right here. You can see I've got a couple of these Sharpie marks for where it exits the harness right there. So I'm going to go ahead and unravel these as I need in order to get them to go where they want. I just did this whole thing here so we can have one really nice concentric spiral that we don't have to worry about messing up. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and put this all together as much as I need in here. I'm going to fix that because that's annoying me. And then hopefully we can wrap the most of this. I'm going to put this tape down just to kind of hold it in place so that we keep the nice spiral everywhere we go. As well, I made a decision last night. I'm no longer going to use this type of heat shrink. And the reason for that is I made these with this heat shrink, right? And this is extremely inflexible. It's very hard. I could mold it like I was planning on doing. When it's warm, it is very soft, and you can mold it into the shape you want. But I want a flexible harness. I want to be able to move it around as I need it. I want it to be able to vibrate a little bit and shake as it needs. And so I am going to buy the expensive heat shrink, the DR25. But the reason I'm doing all of this first is because I found a place where I can buy it by the foot instead of buy like 20-foot rolls, because I don't need 20 feet, and it's really expensive to buy, 3 or 4 different sizes of 20 feet. So I'm going to go ahead, measure everything out here first, and then I can actually just measure the specific lengths of heat shrink that I need. I'll oversize that by 2 or 3 feet, and then call it a day and order it. So hopefully they'll get here in about a week, and I can get this rolling next weekend. Alright, so I'm going to finish this up, we'll put it in the car and see how it looks. Alright, it's a bit stormy, so I didn't take a video, but I just went ahead and took this outside and put it on the car and kind of broke it up into the main things. So if you remember, we had a really nice 3-layer loom. Well, it's back down just to like the first layer over here, and then we have layers 2 and 3 that break off right here. So the way that I did this is I had these purple power and then these blue power on 2 different layers. And so that means that this one that breaks out here for injectors 1, 3, 5, I can use one that's going this way. These blue or the purple wires are going, they're twisting like this, and so they're going with that, and so it's a nice curve off to the edge. And then the blue is going the opposite direction, which matches really well with this. So the first layer and the second layer are going in the different directions. So if it was going the same direction, it'd look really weird, and then it'd have to reverse from what it was doing already. But doing it like this, I can go ahead and keep the second layer here to make it look really nice and keep nice tension on it. Just like this first layer is, how it's really nice and held together. Alright, so it's looking pretty good. Some other modifications I made, I went ahead and spliced into the sensor ground and the 5-volt right here, and they run back. This isn't solidified yet, but they just run back to this, and then they're going to run back up into this, into that stem over there. But the reason that I haven't finished all this yet is because I need to wait for the heat shrink. I'm pretty sure I won't be able to get it over these 2, so I'm going to have to take off at least one of them, if not 2 of them, and these are semi-outer layers, but technically these are on top of them, or they're on the same layer, so to speak. So I'm going to wait to completely finish off of this stem and all this wiring here until I get the heat shrink, because I do need to put a piece right in here, and if I have these really big pieces, I don't think I'm going to be able to get the heat shrink over that to shrink down onto this. So I'm going to have to end up taking these 2 back off. But that's just another reason to get all this beforehand. Regardless, though, I think we're going to make some good progress. I'm going to go ahead and make the 3 main stalks now, the 3 main pathways. So this one I believe is 135, this one I know is 246, and then this one should be sensor ground, map, air intake, air temp, stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead, I marked on the car where they branch off, so I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping these on their own. So I want to aim for a very concentric pattern just like this one here, just so that they're flexible and there's a lot of strain relief inside the actual wire itself. But because we don't have a very thick core like this one did, that's the reason it wraps around really nicely. So I have to figure out, I might use some extra of the TSP wire, but that will make these fairly thick. So I'm going to try to wrap them on my own before I put the TSP wire in the middle. It would not be the end of the world if these ones aren't super concentric like these ones are. It's just, I want it to be like that. I want it to look really nice. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and work on that, and we'll see where we get. Alright guys, hopefully it's not too windy out here and you can hear me alright. And this does look like quite the mess, but I think I have everything set the way it needs to be. So we have our main harness coming in through here. It breaks into 2 branches. The 3rd branch is going over this way. And then this right here is actually coolant temperature, the CHTS. So we'll move that out of the way for now. And then on both sides, I just kind of laid the harness next to this here. And then wherever the injector was, I just put a little piece of the tape. So I've got some right there. I still haven't quite decided if I want to trim this back and then start the injector and coil harnessing in the actual loom, or if I want to have it come outwards and just trim a little bit from the actual coil and wiring, or coil and injector harness themselves. But this is pretty good. Did the same thing to that side. That side's also pretty crazy and hectic. Only thing I need to do now is the map and IAT and throttle position. Those guys need to share a few wires though. But this is how I did it, in case you guys are curious. So let's go ahead and move forward from here. Alright guys, in front of me here is about $100 worth of heat shrink. So it's not like I didn't get a lot. You know, I got 6 feet of 3/4 inch, 10 feet of 1/4 inch, 8 feet of 1/2 inch, and I think 4 feet of 1 inch. That's there before they're shrunk, so this is an inch diameter and it's going to shrink to 1/2 inch. This is a 2-to-1 shrink. But in total it cost me about $100, just a little bit more, plus shipping on top of that. And it starts out at about $3.50 a foot and then goes up. This big stuff was like $6.50 a foot. But I don't need very much of it, so that's why it's a little bit cheaper. But so I did spend a lot of money on this, but I'm really happy with it, honestly. If you guys know what a bike inner tube feels like, it's very similar to that. It's like rubbery and flexible. So I can tell when I put this on, it's going to maintain the flexibility of our wiring harness. I did get this through Mil-Spec They're a subsidiary of Motec, I believe, which is a retailer for a bunch of this stuff. So this box, you can't tell the packaging is from Motec. It says it on the tape, but I'm super happy with this. I'm going to go ahead and bring it over here. I believe I haven't shown you it recently. It's pretty much the same. I added in, these are the ground wires for the coils. So they're all going to come back here. I'm going to put some more connectors on them, some of these 2-pin connectors back here. And then these are actually just going to ground to the upper intake manifold themselves. So that is what these guys are here for. I went ahead and trimmed up every single lead, put a little bit of tape on the end to hold it together. And these are all the length that they need to be. This is the secondary harness right here. This is the third harness, and then this is the first harness. I do have a bunch of wiring right here for a. I'm trying to do an idle control valve. I'm trying to use the stock cold start injector valve, quote unquote. It's basically just a second valve that opens up and it lets more air in on cold start. So you have your typical idle air control, and then you have a secondary air injection. This is secondary air injection. I'm going to try to make it work. I don't know if it will. I've kind of played around with it a little bit and I haven't really seen any results with it. But we're going to try, so that's what that's for. But all the rest of this is looking pretty good. I did go ahead and undo the heat shrink and the connectors on these guys here. These are the injector and coil powers. They do have a little bit of the residue on them still from the adhesive on the heat shrink. But the reason I did that is because I was just a little bit concerned that it wouldn't fit over, the heat shrink wouldn't fit over this. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap these probably backwards on themselves if I can, and then put the heat shrink down all the way through. And then put it on here. So we're going to be using the big stuff that shrinks down to 1/2 inch right between here. So this is a branch off, and then over here this is a branch off. We're going to put a heat shrink there, and then before this I might put another small section, but we need to, every place where we cut the heat shrink, we have to use this adhesive heat shrink around it. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is put that on first, heat shrink the regular stuff, and then put the adhesive stuff over it to seal up all the connections. That's going to give us a good seal. Any place where you have wires bunching out like this, you really want to put epoxy in it. I don't have epoxy right now. I might put epoxy on it in the future. I think I talked about that already. This has been a couple weeks worth of work, guys, just in case you were curious. So I might do that in the future. I'm not 100% sure. And then I think finally you can see I have 4 wires coming through here, wrapping around all the way down. These actually go around here and then back up into this second branch off. So this is the 5-volt reference sensor ground. One of these is for power, for the 12-volt power for the flex fuel, and then another one of these is from an AC compressor to trigger fans. Once I get that set up correctly, that's pretty much it. But I think I might wrap just some filler wires in here, just so that it, you know, is nice and round. It's just this section here really, and then you get a bunch of garbage over here that not really going to worry about that too much. But other than that, I think this is looking pretty good. I'm just going to start heat shrinking things, and I'll update you guys on how it's going. Alright guys, well it is a monster, but the harness is finally done. This probably took me a collective, like in terms of time span, I probably spent about 2 months on this, working on the weekends, and I couldn't even tell you how many hours I've spent. It is a lot of mental planning, just kind of figuring out where things need to go. So if you guys are going to do this, kind of take your time with it, because you don't want to have to mess up and do it again. But overall, it turned out really well. So let's jump into it here. This is the main connector. See all the pins in there. This right here I'm not super fond of. It is the adhesive heat shrink, and so it's very stiff. So I like that it has the support from the stiff heat shrink, but it's not flexible, so it's not preferable in my opinion. Off this main stock here, we have our powers for injectors and coil. You can see it says 12 volts. Those go over to our relays. I'll get to that in a second. 2 of those here. This one here is ground for the power, for the coils and the injectors. That I still need to actually make the harness for it, but it's just, plug and then 2 little eye hooks. Coming over here, this is our coolant temperature sensor, so I changed that out. And then this is the first stock. This is the passenger side. You can see we've got, this is, injector, I don't know, 5 I guess would be all the way to the back. Injector and coil, and then 3 and 1. This is for the idle air control. What I did with this one, because I don't have this set up like yet, and I don't really know what I need, so I just kind of coiled this up, and I left a little bit of heat shrink here. So if I ever, when I'm done with this, I can just put another piece of adhesive heat shrink, seal this up, and it'll be perfectly sealed. So that is really nice. All of these are really nicely sealed as well. The coil connectors, you can kind of see, I wasn't able to put it over, because that's where you push down. So I just kind of had to leave it. If I had time, I would have put epoxy in there, but I didn't have the epoxy at the time, and it took me, I want to say it probably took me 2 or 3 hours to actually do all the injectors and coils, just because of how many steps there were in it. I had to de-pin all of these, and then crimp everything together. They share powers and grounds. It was just kind of a big hassle, and so it took a long time to do each one of them, and the epoxy I'm using sets in 15 minutes, so I definitely wouldn't have enough time to really do any of that. But overall, I think it's still very weather sealed. These are the adhesive ones, so it has adhesive in it. It's just not 100% weatherproof. I could adhesive just the back of it, but I'm not gonna deal with that. Second stock here is the other side, coil and injectors, looking pretty good. This right here is for my AC. I've actually got 2 lines here. One is to turn them on, and then I'm going to try to do electric AC in the future, and so I'm going to need a fan switch. So one of these is fan switch, and then one of these is compressor on. Then we have our crank angle sensor here. I decided to reuse the stock connector because I didn't want to cut up my old connector. It is still fairly flexible, even though it is quite a large set of wires in there. Because remember, this is our twisted shielded wire. But looking pretty nice on that. This is the crank angle sensor, or sorry, the throttle position sensor, map sensor, intake air temperature sensor, and then back here is our boost. So that is all really nice, and all of this reaches and fits. I was super worried about something not reaching, but it does, and it's looking pretty good. This secondary harness over here I have, it's just a big coil. This is for the E-fans up front. So what we do is, coming over here, off of this second stock, I have these set of relays. I wish I had a better way of doing these other than just having wires come in and wires go out. But these relays control the fans, and then this one controls the power for the coils and the injectors. Or I guess it's switched. This is fans, this is coils and injectors. They both grab power from the fusible links box that I have. That's my modified one. And then this is where the E-fans plug in, so I can completely disconnect them. Super simple. Coming up over here, we have this whole stock. This big whole thing right here is my grounds. So I think it was 10 wires, and I put it into a 6-pin connector. So most of them had 2 wires coming in, 2 wires going out. But they're all condensed down into just these 2 right here. This grounds directly to the battery itself. So super, super good. I had it next to the battery before, but now it is going to the battery directly. This is my power for my fuel pump. These here, this is oil pressure and temperature. These wires are actually really, really small. I don't know if you can see those. They gotta be 24, 26 gauge wires, really small. And this connector I bought just doesn't have any way to heat shrink it or weatherproof it. So you can see the wires are just kind of chilling there. I wish I had some sort of 4-pin connector that I could have actually heat shrunk onto, but that's an unfortunate lack of foresight on my fault. This guy here is the connector that came with the, that's the pressure sensor, but this is for fuel pressure. This was a pain to do. The little things in there, the pins just did not want to go into this, and I hated every moment of that. It took me like 45 minutes to pin 3 pins. Absolutely the worst thing in the world. And then flex fuel right here. This actually might need to get lengthened a little bit. It is literally at the end of its reach, so I might, put in another 3 inches. But it fits. Technically it fits. So overall, guys, this harness came out really well. What I did is put some epoxy in all of the places. I don't know if you guys can see in there. There's some epoxy in here. Any place where I had 2 wires splitting out, so this main to 2, put some epoxy in there. This part right here, obviously there's like 6 wires coming out of it. Epoxy in there. Any place like this, I put some epoxy. Hopefully you guys can see that. Just because even though I had the adhesive heat shrink, it's not 100% perfect. It can't get between the DR25 itself. So being able to put the epoxy in between the DR25 is going to make it super, super weather sealed. And pretty much all of these places I put epoxy in just because I really did not want any water or anything to get in this. I wanted this to be a fully sealed harness, and it's not perfectly fully sealed. This is a good example, but it is really, really good. Alright, so I'm going to go put this on the car, and we're going to see kind of how everything lines up and how everything works, but I'm super happy with it. Alright guys, I got pretty much the entire harness in. There's a few things that are on the upper intake plenum that I haven't put on yet. But let's go ahead and jump down into here. We're going to go ahead and start with the secondary stock just because it's kind of out of the way here. This is the power for the fuel pump, so it needs to go on the battery positive right there. And I'm actually going to add an inline fuse to this. Just a real quick wiring tip, guys. You always want your fuse right next to the battery. The reason for that is because I currently have my fuse all the way in the back next to the pump. But if the wire running through here somewhere were to ground, like maybe I stepped on it or something, it's not running under my floor, but just imagine it did and I stepped on it and it grounded out into here. Well, there's no fuse between here and here that's going to keep it from just grounding and causing an electrical fire. So what you want is a fuse right up here so that anywhere down the line, if there's an issue, it'll just pop this fuse and cut power immediately to everything. So we're definitely going to be putting that in here. You can see the way I have these relays here wired up. They're coming from this fuse box. This is my fusible links. I make this on my website. You guys can order one from there if you want to replace your old one with a new one. And I had these 2 open because I don't use these. These are EFI relay and something else for the EFI, but I don't use them anymore, so they're going to be powering my fan and my my coils and injectors. Just what they were originally intended for the most part. These are 50 amp fuses. I'm going to be swapping them over to the 40 amps just because these are 40 amp relays. Keep everything the same. This connector here is for my, drop my wrench. This connector here is for the E-fans. It runs down along the frame rail up over into here. We got a connector in there, really looking nice. Connector in there looking pretty nice. And then that wire right there that runs up around over here grounds out to the ground for the fan. So they have power and ground. It looks really, really nice. Onto the main stock here. This is the grounded, the ground for the injectors and coils. So I need to make that. But then we have coil and injector. Can't really see the injector down there, but it also looks really nice. And then injector, coil. Got 3 on this side. This right here is for the idle air control. When I get this working, I'll make a video on it just in case you guys are running Megasquirt. We can go over that as well. Coming onto this side, we have injector coil. I've got one of my coils missing right now because it actually connects to the upper intake manifold. But then coming over here on this stock, we have our map sensor, and then we have our connectors for the intake air temp and the throttle position. Those are not connected because they're on the upper intake, obviously. And then lastly, the casts right here. This is kind of the main reason we did this whole harness. I'm not super thrilled with the placement of it. I really wish I could have put it in just a little bit better of a spot, maybe just like right here. So I guess in the future I could cut this and shorten it, but I don't know if I will. I just kind of have this lead kind of coiled up around it real quick, and then it is connected right there. But I think it will do for what we have. This is for the AC. This is a trigger for the compressor, and then I have another line running here that's going to trigger the fans. The reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to be trying to switch to an electric AC compressor in the upcoming months here. So if you guys keep an eye on the channel for that, because it is going to be, it's going to be an adventure. We're going to figure out if it's possible and how to make it work. So I think that will be very, very cool. Other than that, guys, I think that is it for this episode. I know it was a really, really long one, and I'm super glad if you guys are here all the way to the very end. But if you have any questions or comments about this, definitely drop a comment down below. This is my first quote-unquote professional harness, so I obviously made a few mistakes, but if you guys have any advice, definitely drop a comment. I'm always willing to learn, and I'm always willing to address the mistakes that I made, just because I want to, you know, this channel is for learning. So definitely let me know what you think, how everything came out in your eyes, and hopefully the next video we'll see is me taking this for the first drive on this new harness with a boost controller. And oh yeah, I guess I forgot to tell you guys about that. I have the boost controller down in here. You can see it's mounted right there. I just printed that little bracket out as well. You guys can tell me if you're interested in that, but I don't think it's a great solution. It's just kind of something right for the moment. But other than that, we've got a boost controller. We've got a really nice harness. We should have a nice, clean, clear cast signal. And of course we have our brand new transmission. So the next video should be me driving, my take on the new transmission, how everything looks, how everything feels, and any issues that I run into it, because I'm probably going to run into some issues. And the new fuel system. I haven't driven on the new fuel system yet. So hopefully you guys are excited for all of that as I am. And I will see you guys in the next video.